Hi, everybody. I'm just jumping in here because I was looking at the year ahead and I was thinking about the coronation coming up in the UK. And I thought I'd have a look at Charles' chart compared to the coronation chart and see what that would look like. Because, of course, it's a transit to his chart directly, and it's going to tell us quite a bit about his way of ruling if he ever gets there. Poor thing, he's waited this long. Let me show you a little bit about what's going on in his chart to begin with. Let's just start perhaps with his birth chart. So we have, of course, a sun in Scorpio. We know that Charles has quite an intense relationship with his mother. And one of the ways that we can see this is that his fourth house is quite full. But the other aspect of this is that he has Ketu in the fourth house and right next to Mercury. And in the Indian traditional way of looking at the planets, Mercury is considered the prince. And it's kind of like this symbolic sort of being parked all his life, Mercury Ketu, not being able to fully express that Mercury. And of course, that's in Scorpio, which is a more hidden aspect of his chart. So the sun is ruling his chart, and the sun is again buried in the fourth house. So already we see here we have the Leo rulership, the Leo rising. Pluto in the first house, so that's very strong in terms of transformation and making one's present felt. But when Pluto is in the first house, it often leads to people getting annoyed by you. That's one of the things that Charles has kind of been plagued with his whole life, and just attracting other people's ire and not always understanding why, because it's sometimes it just happens because you're an easy target when Pluto's in the first house. You want to see things done differently, and you want to often impose your way on other people. We see that also in the modern rulership. Of course, Pluto would be ruling that sun. So let's just say, in any case, we'll leave that aside for now, and we'll just say, of course, the sun is the chart ruler, buried away in the fourth house of mother and home and legacy, and the family skeletons, especially in Scorpio. And right next to Chiron, which of course is, Sun conjunct Chiron is going to be an aspect of the father as well, relationship to the father that is challenging him, and that we see for sure. Chiron also with the Sun is very much about insecurity, or a sense of not being able to stand out, not being able to shine, let's say, in the way that a good, strong sun could. And so basically, it tells the story of his life, even just here in the fourth house. If we're not looking at anything else, here we have this person who's been kind of muffled his whole life and buried away, almost in hiding. But what's he destined for? He's destined for this Rahu, this North Node up there in the 10th house, very, very proud and strong up in the 10th house. But Rahu is with the moon. Rahu with the moon is one of the most challenging aspects to have in astrology. Clearly, he was born around the time of an eclipse. Let me just check the dates on that, because I just realized I should have checked that before. That's quite significant. So if we look for an eclipse around the time he was born, then that would have been on the 1st of November. So not too close. Not too close. Okay, so he's within 2 weeks of an eclipse, which is, far enough away. However, the moon is lurking up there with Rahu. And that's not great. Moon North Node is a lot of psychological issues. It's the mother, of course, is the moon. Um, this is the queen's sun. So in her chart, she has a 0 degrees Taurus sun. This is significant for the royal family. That 0 degrees Taurus stands out in the royal family for some reason. By the way, I'm not a royalist. I just find that, they're so popular and there's such a lot that we know about them. They're an easy way of describing astrology. And I just love pointing out where things really show up. And so for those of you wanting to learn, if you're into the royalty, then you're here in the right place as well. But if you're here to learn astrology, that's what I'm doing this for, especially. So if we come back to this connection with the Rahu and the moon, and we're looking at something that is not kind of psychologically unsettled, it's a person who is never at peace, constantly seeking, constantly unsettled, never being able to be fully at peace. And this is a bit of a shame, because when with the moon in Taurus, then the idea would be, in principle, it's a very lovely moon. I mean, moon is in exaltation in Taurus and loves to be there because it can settle. The moon is roaming around all over the place, and moon in Taurus is one of the most calm types of moons that we can have. But then there's this north node that intervenes, pesky north node. We also have the moon opposite. Of course, that we have to see that polar opposite, and we see that Mercury is there opposite the moon, opposite Rahu. So that also defines that restlessness. It's really a challenge that he has had his whole life. Fourth house is also psychology. So that's definitely issues around his sense of happiness, just general contentment, which I think has been not easy for him. We also see that Venus is conjunct, very closely conjunct Neptune, and that would suggest hidden relationships and a serious romantic, somebody who's incredibly romantic. And we've seen that in his life. This very romantic person, and again thwarted by his experience of his family and by his duty to the family, thwarted initially, at least, in his love for Camilla. Another aspect that we see is Saturn in the second house. Saturn in the second house, especially early in life, is not easy. And that Saturn is in a trine to the moon, so that can also be a drag, quite literally a drag. Saturn, of course, also is sextiling Mercury, so it can be supportive of Mercury, but Saturn in Virgo is super fussy, very seldom content. So there's that sense of never being happy again. And the second house is representing our family, our early life support, whatever thing supports us. And so I think he probably grew up with a feeling that he wasn't supported by his family. I should think that would be more emotionally than anything else. And it's weirdly true that somehow it was always known that the Queen's favorite child was Andrew. So it's kind of a drag when you're one of them, and everybody seems to know that Andrew is the favorite and not you. And look how that turned out. So here we have the Saturn in the second house as well, where often people would suggest that would mean not being able to access wealth. That's not really always true, and especially when people are conscientious about wealth or conscientious about the way that they handle money, they can become extremely wealthy. Of course, it helps if you inherit all that money. So voila. And so the other aspect of restlessness that's very, very strong in his chart is this opposition between Uranus, which is in this very social aspect of his chart, and also his dreams and goals. So meaning that, very last degree, very, very end of the last degree of Gemini, that's incredibly restless energy. And then if it weren't restless enough, it's opposite Jupiter within 2 arc minute of a degree. So that's pretty restless. We see that restlessness also plays out in terms of romance as well, because of course that fifth house is the house of romance as well. It's the house of sport as well. We see Mars there. Mars Jupiter makes a great sportsman. And I don't know so much about nowadays, but he was always athletic. He was into polo and not sure what else, but he was certainly very active as a young person. And so that is a healthy way of describing that. And that's a very strong Jupiter again. But, opposite Uranus, it's really restless energy. So this is kind of what we get. Charles he's not going to be that much different. He certainly will have had to repress a lot. And I think repression is the word, because we're seeing Scorpio. So that's about secrets and what is hidden, so on. And of course, who is ruling that sun in Scorpio is that very restless Mars in Sagittarius, conjunct Jupiter, which is restless in any sign. So Jupiter Mars is always going to be busy, busy, busy. And so a very interesting natal chart to begin with. We already get a picture of the man that we know, which is somebody who's incredibly restless, impatient, frustrated in his position, the prince, le dauphin, waiting his whole life to achieve the throne. And I wonder even if he's going to get there. Now it's December 27th as I'm doing this. So we still have a few months. You never know. Nothing's guaranteed, right? So I just wanted to show you the transits, which is the date that is set for the coronation, is the 6th of May. And of course, that's London. So I've set it for Greenwich. And so that's 6th of May. And I'm giving it an 11 a.m. time because it's kind of when these things happen. It's really hard to say. The ascendant is Leo. Now, briefly, and I'm still not sure. I wondered, I mean, because Charles is very alternative. And then I was thinking, well, maybe he got an astrologer. I know Diana definitely used astrologers. I don't know about Charles, but if an astrologer devised this chart, they don't understand electional charts. Or maybe because there was a time constraint and they had to do it around this time, and that one way or another, that this seemed like the best option. But here we actually have an eclipse, and so the eclipse was the day before, something like 1745 on the 5th of May, London time, 1745. So he's roughly, I don't know, like 18 hours out from an eclipse, something like that, at the time of the coronation. And again, I don't know the time. I'm going based on what they typically do, which is sort of late morning, around midday time for these ceremonies. And that could change the ascendant if that's a very different time. So that's something that none of this will make sense if that's a different time. But we'll see. I'll revise if that's the case later on. Just to say that I just want you to see how much this is lining up. So again, now this is an eclipse. He was not born on an eclipse. He was born 2 weeks later, but with the moon on the North Node, he's having an exact nodal return. So that's quite significant. This is the 4th nodal return for him. So this is quite significant timing. And again, if it's by accident, that's quite astonishing. And if it's not, then I would love to meet the astrologer who thought that this was a brilliant idea. So here we have the North Node coming right back to the North Node, but just on the heels of an eclipse, which is never, ever going to be a good time to establish something that you want to last. Just keep that in mind if you're thinking of getting married, or I don't know, starting a new job, or applying for a job, or going on a first date or something like that. Don't do it on an eclipse. I mean, if you can't help it, obviously that's different, but it's certainly going to be unsettled. Now, of course, there are flukes, but it's not an easy energy to handle because it's extremely turbulent and very unpredictable, and you don't want that baked into an event chart. Okay, so already we've got this nodal return, which on its own is not a problem, by the way. It's just the fact that it's returning at an eclipse. That's what we don't like. Okay, so a nodal return in itself is not necessarily a problem for an event chart, although I'd rather see other things. And then the other thing that's extremely important for an electional chart. So an electional chart is when you decide, I want to do this thing, what's the best time to do it? So we're saying, okay, well, let's look for this particular thing to have a good moon. That good moon is for virtually everything that you can imagine doing. And especially if you want to be king, you want the moon to be really good because the moon represents people, and you'd like the people to think you're pretty neat. And I don't think that's going to be the case. So here we have the moon in Scorpio in its fall. Remember that moon that he has natally? That's the moon in its element. The moon loves to be in Taurus. It's an exalted moon, and the opposite sign of Scorpio is where the moon is very uncomfortable. Doesn't like it at all. For similar reasons, Venus doesn't like to be in Scorpio because Venus rules Taurus, and so when she's in the opposite sign, she's in detriment. So here we have a lousy moon, really not a great moon, and that's already on its own. It would be like, that's a shame. But then combined with the fact that we've got an eclipse, and that we've got all of this really tense and conflicting energy in fixed signs. So what I didn't point out in his birth chart is that he's got fixed signs on the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th on the major axes of the chart. And that's challenging. The other aspect of this is the moon being so important is that we want to find out who's ruling this moon. Well, now we know, of course, where's this ruler? It's Mars hiding away. Again, what are you doing, Charles? Hiding away in the 12th house. In Cancer. Mars doesn't like being in Cancer. Mars is exalted in Capricorn, which is the opposite sign. Does very well. It's like executive energy, really knows how to spend its energy. Mars in Cancer is not really able to take advantage of that energy. It's much softer, which can be welcome in some places. And in fact, I think in some way that could be an advantage for him because he's going to have this. I'll get to that in a minute. He's going to have this outspokenness that he won't be able to bury. That's his way. The Mercury Rahu is going to be hard for him to shut up, and he's not supposed to have opinions as a king. So here we have this Mars, very grumpy in the 12th house. Mars does not like being in 12th house, so it's already behind the scenes. It doesn't like being there. It doesn't let this like relegated to this place where it needs to be behave, which is now this, of course, is Charles' life story, and of course in Cancer, where Mars is very passive aggressive and doesn't know how to really stand up for itself. So I'd say we're going to get quite a lot of. I'm gonna guess leaks from the palace every now and then, because of course it would be really uncouth for him to do that directly. Although who knows, maybe he's past the point of caring after all these years. One good thing about this is that that's in Ashwini, so that's very good. North Node. It's the Mercury Sun that's in Bharani. That's not good. The North Node in Ashwini is very cooperative. It's very, I guess it's one of the things that Charles actually gets away with. It makes him charming in a way, and that can be part of the charm. But I'm not sure it's going to be enough to balance out the Mercury Sun in Bharani, because that's heavy. It's going to, I think, with Mercury retrograde on top of that, I think he's going to find this whole thing a real burden. It's not going to be easy for him. I think there's an enormous amount of pressure. The nodes are also squaring the ascendant. It's not only squaring his natal ascendant, which it is natally as well, but so it's squaring his natal ascendant, which is challenging, and of course descendant by extension. And it's also squaring the ascendant, the transiting ascendant. So this is a very significant, when the nodes square important points like that, it's a very strong energy for change again, very impactful. And then guess who's there on the other end of that? It's Pluto in the 7th. So transformation guaranteed. He's going to have his Pluto opposition. That won't come up until probably like, I don't know the degrees exactly, 2026 maybe. It's going to be a while. But nonetheless, by sign, he's already getting his Pluto opposition, as anyone with Pluto in Leo is having. I'm going to do a video on Pluto in Aquarius coming up, so you'll see a lot of aspects of Pluto and Leo. That's that basically the whole 40s, people who were born in wartime and just afterwards and into the 50s, they all have Pluto in Leo, and that's what's basically crumbling. We're going to see in the next few years, whether that be institutions or individuals, we're going to see things changing. Significant social figures will be leaving us as well. So, and then of course Pluto will have to cross that descendant ascendant axis as well, and that will happen again probably not before late 2025. Pluto is so slow. So 2025, let's say, to start, and then 2026. And then, of course, with the other aspects of the transits, we've got Saturn in the 8th house. So that's hard. Saturn in the 8th is not fun. It's where you're confronted with your greatest fears. You're confronted with all the things that are other people's problems. It's like other people's money, other people's values. And guess what? It's exactly almost to the degree. So again, within a half a degree opposition, it's a Saturn opposition. So I'm like, I don't know. Sometimes I look at this and I think, there's so many things lining up here. Can this just be chance? I don't know. Or did some really bad astrologer decide on this date? So yeah, Saturn opposition. God help him if he actually makes it to the throne. This is going to be a really big challenge. This is a make or break kind of energy where a lot of things have to change, and that could be good. Maybe he'll just rise to the occasion. I can't imagine in the modern era having to go through all of that medieval stuff and keep a straight face. So here we also have another aspect that could be in his favor, which is that Venus is directly conjunct this Uranus. Venus in Gemini is not super stable either. That Venus, of course, being right opposed to his Jupiter, will make him personally feel very good. That would be the one thing I would say, well, okay, well done. You've chosen Venus opposite Jupiter, so that feels good for a little bit. And Venus is also in the 11th house of the public. And so maybe that will make up for this really lousy moon that he has. So yeah, good luck to him. And Venus on, of course, Venus on Uranus is going to be very changeable. There's going to be quite a lot of a potential shift in values. That might be something that triggers. Of course, he's already signaled that he will change a few things. And the one thing about Bharani Nakshatra is that it's very conservative. And so Sun and Mercury and Bharani is very much about kind of keeping the faith and doing things the way they've already been done. And so it's quite conservative in that way. So I don't think he's going to be able to change as much as he probably would like to, personally. But I'd say he'll try. We also have Uranus in, quite a strong opposition. It's like 3.5 degrees opposition to his natal sun. And that's a career change. So there you go, Charles. Finally, you got your career change. Another aspect that is very interesting is that Jupiter is in a lovely trine to his natal Jupiter, fifth and ninth house. Very, very supportive, very benefic. So again, if there were any elements of this chart that I would say, yeah, that's a great idea, this would be one of them as well. Jupiter in the ninth house, this is the house of higher mind, higher thinking, higher philosophy, dharma, meaning, life purpose. And that's exactly the midheaven that he has as well. So it's really like what he's here to do. Of course, alas, it's ruled by this really lousy Mars. So again, that midheaven is conjunct. I mean, it's really crazy because he's born in November. So to have exactly the same ascendant and so on is really makes me wonder, did they really look for this? Because it's it's so close, a couple of degrees off at the most here and there. And, his coronation is early May, so it makes me wonder. I've looked it up. I've tried to find, through the ethers, I've tried to find out if there's an astrologer lurking out there somewhere that works with the royal family, but I haven't found it. Certainly there was nobody on duty when Harry and Meghan got married, because on the day of their marriage, Uranus was on that 0 degrees Taurus point, which is the Queen's birthday. Charles' moon, again, for an electoral chart, is a huge no-no. Uranus is destabilizing, it's chaotic, it's going to give you everything but what you want. And that's exactly what we've seen in the last 5 years, almost 4.5 years. Right. I'm not going to delve too much deeper into this. I just wanted to point these things out because I think they're really interesting how these things line up. Closer to the time, if it does look like Charles is still standing and going to carry on with this coronation, then we'll have another look at what that might look like for closer to the time. And in the meantime, spare a thought for Charles as Pluto moves into his 7th house. And as the eclipses continue to hammer away at his 4th house and 10th house over the next 6 months. Anyway, that's all I wanted to jump in here with, and I will speak to you again in another video. Bye.